We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order of the TRPA Governance and Operations Committee. The date is Wednesday, June 26th, and the time is 8:32 a.m. Maria, may we please have the roll call?
Mr. Aguilar,
Here.
Mr. Bass, Miss Gustafson,
Here.
Miss Hill,
Here.
Miss Lane.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Great. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for the day. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov. Under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for June 26th. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raise hand at the bottom of your screen at the appropriate agenda item. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. For members that are agendized as for items that are agendized as informational only, we will hear public comment during the general public comment period at the end of the meeting. Comments on items agendized for action or possible action, we will hear public comment before the committee takes any action. To the remote members that are online, if you wish to speak, you can also now raise your hand in Zoom. You'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on background noise. And finally, I would also ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they are able. Those of you who are in the room, if you wish to speak, simply raise your hand or throw a wad of paper at me and I will call on you. The next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Mr. Cox, are there any changes or misreading to the agenda?
No changes.
No. Okay, then we'll go ahead and deem the agenda approved as posted for the record. We'll now go to agenda item number 2, approval of the minutes. We have draft minutes from May 22nd on page 9 of your packet. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Thank you. There's a motion to approve. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. On other items that are action, do we have to do a roll call vote? Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, that brings us to agenda item number 3, discussion and possible recommendation for approval of the May financials. This information can be found on page 79 of your packet. And Mr. Cox.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hope you're well. Chad Cox, TRPA CFO for the record. Quick budget update. I think you guys have probably seen in the news. The budget agreement has been reached for the state of California. I don't think that's quite been inked yet, but that's good news for us as an agency. Our funding is whole in that agreement. The REAP grants are in at full, and then also the active transportation is in there. So that's good for the agency. On the Nevada front, we did receive approval by the Board of Examiners for the salary adjustments that were part of the bill 522, which is good. That had been on the agenda for June, and that was approved, and we've actually received the funds just last week. So
Great.
thank you, State of Nevada. Yeah, thank you. And then, we have had some good productive meetings with the state of California over the last couple of weeks, both with Secretary Crawford and Director Settlemyer, as well as we got to meet our new analyst, Julie Alvis, who will be supporting the TRPA. So continued discussions there, which is great. Mind jumping to the next slide? So for May, highlights. so far. This is all year to date. Revenues are at 67% of budget. Planning fees, which is an area that we continue to focus, right? Those are at 88% of budget. So those are on plan for the year. We're ahead of prior year in planning fees, and those will continue to ramp as we're into, kind of full on building season. Shoreline fees and AIS fees are also on budget. And where we're behind is on grant implementation. Grant implementation, grants are at, I think we'll probably land somewhere between, 70 or so percent of the grant budget for the year. So we're working through that, and it's just a function of that implementation timing shifting to the right. So as we get into the budget, you'll see some of the grants from 2024 that have shifted fiscal years. Expenses are at 62% of budget. Comp is right on plan at 90%. And those contracts are under because those contracts are what we use to execute and implement those grants. And then we did make our second and final debt interest payment on June 1st. So that'll bring the debt item up to 100% for 100% of budget for the year. Next slide. A little bit more info on revenue, breaking it down by revenue stream. The only thing I'd I guess add to this page is on the last line, you'll see the item in red, which is actually a negative is good here. We've had more other revenue, which is a function of the interest income on our investments. This also includes mitigation. I have a mitigation line item here. I've stripped it out of the totals just to keep that clear. That's not part of the budget. And those, especially the expenses, come in lumpy, so we don't forecast those. Over to the next slide on expenses. Like I mentioned earlier, the expenses are on track to meet budget, with the exception of the grant or the contracts, which is aligned with grants. And you can see the mitigation spend of $5 million, which we know the main drivers of that, right? We approved the Motel 6. There was a street sweeper approval, and then a handful of other mitigation projects that you all have seen and approved over the last 11 months. Any questions on those? No? Okay. Moving to the next slide is on cash flow. So cumulatively, year to date, excluding mitigation, we actually dipped to cash usage, meaning we've had more go out than come in just this month. Typically, the state's incomes come in and then we spend them down. We hadn't received the Nevada state item yet. So year to date, excluding mitigations, we're at a usage of $400,000. And we expect that to neutralize out by the end of June here, as we finish the grant billing and expenditures around the contracts. When I look at the actual month of May, that's where we had the main usage of cash. We had receipts of $1.4 million in the month of May, which was driven by $400,000 of grant invoicing, a couple $100,000 of mitigation fees, and the balance were from our AIS planning and those other fees that we receive as an agency. Disbursements were $2 million, which was just operating activity. That's our payables and our payroll mainly. So in conclusion, right, this will be the last look at the financials until we show you guys the audited financials for fiscal year 24. The team will be kicking off the audit here, the interim audit in July. And then we go through a process throughout the summer and into the fall where we go through and do the audit with our partners, our audit partners, and then we provide an audited set of financial statements to the board later this year. So with that concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Any questions of the committee members in the room? No? Ms. Hill, online, you okay?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have two questions on the discussions with the state of Nevada and the state of California. On the state of Nevada, I remember being reassured, and I forgot if it was last meeting or the meeting before that, that we were still putting in our request for TTD, the 1/3 operations for TTD as part of our budgetary request for the biennium. So that's my first request that I just want to make sure that I am correct is that understanding. And then for our discussions with California, are we telling them, the state of California, that the state of Nevada has put in 1/3 operations for TTD and California still has not? And how are those discussions going? That would be very helpful for me to understand, because while speaking to state of Nevada representatives this next biennium, it's going to be tough to, get that funding if California is not doing their fair share. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I?
Please.
Thank you, Member Hill. This is Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. Thank you for the question. I do believe we need to sit down with TTD and discuss the next steps. One request that we made during the surplus years of California, we bundled that TTD operational support with a Highway 89 corridor implementation request, near and dear to Member Lane's heart. And we did not get that request funded. We were not able to do it this year because no budget change proposals were entertained because of the big deficit in California. And so right now is the time to open those discussions with California, but we'll need TTD to sit down to do that as well. So I'm meeting with Carl Hasty tomorrow. And so we'll put that on our agenda, Member Hill, and make a plan of how we might engage our California delegation around that.
And what is that
Thank you.
dollar amount that we're talking about?
600,000 roughly.
And Madam Chair, just clarifying, on the request on the Nevada side, where are we with that?
For the next biennium, or for, just to
The
clarify your
next
question?
biennium. Yes, sir. Because we already have the money for TTD. It's a pass-through grant for TTD through TRPA for
Yep.
this biennium. Next biennium.
Yep, I can
Yeah,
jump on
yeah,
that.
I mean,
Yep.
it will be included in our request. Obviously, since we're, the current biennium what was approved for 24 and 25, we already received the 330 from the state of Nevada for this fiscal, and it's in the plan for next fiscal. We will need to re-request that as we go through the next budget process, and that will be part of our ask. Yeah,
Thank you. I just wanted clarification. Thank you.
you're welcome.
No, thank you for raising that question, because that gets on my radar as well. So I heard two different numbers. I heard 600,000, but then you just mentioned 330,000.
330 is Nevada, so the California portion would be
Okay,
1/3.
gotcha. Okay,
Double, yeah.
all right. And
ju-
we already missed this year, so we're behind. Okay.
This is Member Bass. I'm just curious that brings up some questions. So on our overall funding, generally California is 2/3 and Nevada is 1/3, just talking about the kind of overall funding that comes in for TRPA. Is that not still the case right now, or how did that change just on an overall revenue side of things?
Overall, excluding what I would consider kind of special funds, we are close to the 2/3, 1/3. Including those special funds, which is a special grant from the state of Nevada for scanning project where we're digitizing our records. If you put that back in, and then there's another where each state is half and half for our AIS program. Each state, which we'll talk about in the budget, provides $375,000 to the AIS program. If you exclude those, we're at 2/3, 1/3. If you include those, we're closer to 62% California, 38% Nevada. So in that case, if you look at it on that basis, you'd request California to work up a bit.
And Madam Chair, I'll just add to that, Member Bass. This is Julie Reagan for the record. Historically, TRPA makes the request of both states in that 2/3, 1/3 ratio for our general fund. And we're just talking about our general fund baseline appropriations. That has ebbed and flowed over the years. And since the recession at the end of around 2008, 2010, Nevada was below their 1/3 share. And Nevada state and California stayed whole with their 2/3 share. In the last session, however, we were able to get Nevada's share back to its 1/3. So it was a huge accomplishment from really work of this board. Member Hill was a champion for that among many other members. And we want to keep that 2/3, 1/3 going. It gets a little out of kilter when we have special one-time requests. And that is what Chad Cox was talking about with the scanning project. We also made that scanning request to California, but did not get that funded because of the state of their budget deficit that they're in. So, but we're really around that 1/3, 2/3 ratio for the first time in a very long time.
Are there any further questions on this item or anything else regarding the May financials? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and move to public comment. If any member of the public wishes to address the Ops and Governance Committee on this item, please raise your hand either in person, if you're here in the room, or online. Are there any online comments?
Madam Chair, we have one so far. Ann Nichols, if you'd like to address the committee, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. Looking at the books, what was striking to me was that of the $27.8 million budget, only 400,000 is being paid for code enforcement. You know, it's 1.5%. It's just a minor, you know, it's just kind of nothing. It's less than you pay on IT. And it just seems like it's been so underfunded for so long. And I mean, you only had, I think, 2 people for a long time. It just seems that the focus for TRPA should be more on enforcement. There's all these things going on right now with, you know, the billionaires building underwater hockey pools, and, you know, it's crazy. And then, you know, I've always had the question about the contracts. It's 44% of the budget. And there's just, the detail is so lacking. It would be really good for the public to know. And I've asked for this and talked to your people about, give us some examples of who you're paying. Is this all consultants, or is it, you know, how, because you spend 4.5 million on agency management. So it just, you know, these are just questions for transparency and trying to figure out what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Are there any other comments online?
Next, Ellie Waller, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you, Ellie Waller. I support Ann Nichols' comments. Code enforcement is often led by citizen complaint, which is great. I would like to add that they probably need more budget, and a simple response when a citizen sends in an enforcement action, whether it's viable or not, needs to start happening, and maybe more budget is appropriate for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waller.
Madam Chair, we have no further public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public comment. Are there any further comments from the committee? Questions, comments? No? Yes, Ms. Reagan.
Madam Chair, thank you, Julie Reagan. Just since we had just those brief public comments, I thought I might address a couple issues just for the benefit of the committee, if that's
Thank you.
helpful.
That would be great.
Certainly. I did want to point out in the budget, if you look at last year's work program, you know, we added 2 legal positions, which speaks directly to the enforcement concerns that we heard. And we've added a 3rd compliance inspector in our current work program. So we have addressed that. We do share the concerns with just the volume and the workload. It's an area that we actually, when we go to the presentation around the work plan, I'll be talking about a continuous improvement idea that came out of the governing board discussion and some of our internal meetings to even strengthen compliance and enforcement going forward. So that's an important aspect of our operation here. And when you look at the budget, there are more staff members that are engaged in enforcement and compliance than are necessarily tied, you know, to those positions. It's spread all across the agency in different departments. It's embedded in a lot of different cost centers. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know I've brought to your attention some code enforcement issues myself, and it's what I see in government all the time is we enact all these rules, but you know, the enforcement lags a little bit behind. So I think that those are important comments that both the members of our public made. And it's great to hear that we're kind of, you know, beefing up that. Okay, so at this time, Mr. Aguilar.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's an important opportunity too, to educate citizens about some of the code enforcement. If they're not getting responses, they don't know what happens to the complaints. The same thing we have in the voting and election spaces. We try to respond to every single individual. One, it's a learning opportunity to explain the law, but it's also to an opportunity to know that we hear them, we got the complaint, and it's been received. So.
Good point. Okay, if there's no further comments, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Motion to approve, to recommend approval of the May financials. It's okay. There's a motion. There's a motion. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes,
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item number 4, which is a recommendation for approval of the fiscal year 2024-2025 annual operating budget, which will be heard by the board later today as well. But Mr. Cox, if you'd walk us through that.
Thank you again. So to frame up the budget, stepping back, wanted to let everybody know that this does reflect the priorities that we discussed in May at our offsite. It supports our 3 strategic priorities and continues to enable our agency to advance our thresholds. And it connects those priorities to funding sources, which is important. We need to fund those. The budget also continues our ongoing process improvement programs. And it invests in our talented organization that will empower our team to do good work. If we move to the next slide, wanted to hit a few highlights before we jump right into the number. We know the 3 strategic priorities, right? Tahoe living, keep Tahoe moving, and restoration and resilience. As we went through that offsite meeting, we also addressed a bunch of emerging issues. We'll cover those as we go through the work plan, but we want you to know that this budget does include the priorities and those emerging issues that we've committed to work through for the 25 fiscal year. The budget is balanced, which is important. We are utilizing roughly $236,000 of remaining bond money. When we did the bond year a few years ago, we had set aside money to do a maintenance project on the retaining wall. That project has been kicked off in fiscal year 24. We'll spend roughly 25% of that project will get done in 2024, which means 75% of the project will carry over to 25. So the budget is balanced with that usage of bond fund. And then the other highlight, right, is we are fully staffed. We have 75 permanent employees plus our seasonal boat crew and interns, and that staff is funded in the budget. So moving to the next slide, this is the budget at a high level. There's 2 columns, revenues and expenses. The budget is broken down by fund, which you have the general fund and special funds. There are 3 general funds, which is our overall general fund, which is where agency management sits, our planning and compliance and shore zone general funds, and then our special funds, which I think you are all intimate with. We've got AIS, EIP, transportation, and our best management practice budget. So those special funds balance out. Those are neutral. Those are grant driven. And you can see the $236,000 net deficit, which is what we're covering with the bond fund. As you know, the revenue streams are diverse for TRPA. Across 2 states, there's 5 counties providing local support. There's over 50 grants. This captures the Transportation Overall Work Plan, or OWP. as well as, you know, the fees that we collect for planning, compliance, shore zone and AIS. So it's a pretty diverse revenue stream, and that's what that $29.4 million represents. This is an increase versus last year's budget, the 24 fiscal budget of $2 million, which is mainly driven by the state's contributions. As those salary increases come in year over year, that'll bring up the state's contributions. And then also we have incremental grant funding coming in mainly from the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act and the infrastructure pass-throughs. Those are the real drivers for the increase in the grants. And I'll get more into the revenue in a minute, but this is just the high level. Couple other points to note. The planning fund isn't fully covering its cost. The goal is to get there. The miss there, the differential is mainly driven by the administration and overhead application. We got to take our overhead and apply it. That's what the accounting rules require us to do. So that A&O is what mainly drives the planning fund to be short net. And these expenses effectively cover the cost to do the work plan. So that 29.6 is the cost to do the work plan. So with that, we'll jump, if it's okay, to the next page. What I'd like to do is I want to go through income and then expenses. And as we go through income, I want to give you a landscape, want to talk a little bit about assumptions, and then just give you a feel for year over year, the changes for each of those. From an income perspective, like I said earlier, that it's a diverse income stream. You know, coming into this position just a few months ago was interesting for me to see how TRPA operates and all the different areas that we do receive income. 51% of this year's or of the 25 proposed budget, 51% will come from grants, which is roughly half. We mentioned the next item here is the state's funding. 18% comes from the states. I know Cody had the question around the compact ratio. We are close to that compact ratio as Julie had mentioned, but we do need to continue to work on that because every time we have an incremental item come in, we need to go back to the other state to ensure that we work through the ratios. Planning fees are 16% of the budget, and those are up year on year because of the increasing costs that we have as an agency. So the goal is to cover those costs with fee income. And then the other income here is only 5%, but it's driven by local support, that rental income. Brooke, I know you had a question. We do have tenants at this facility, so there's rental income included there, as well as the investment interest income that we have on our investments. So that's the landscape. That's where the revenue comes from in the budget. The next is around assumptions. We talked about the state revenue. Those are known at this point and approved through both states' budgets. These revenues include carryover. Like I talked about in the May update, we have had some of the grants implementation shift. So some of those implementations from prior year carry into the current fiscal year. From a fees perspective, we've assumed a 5% inflation on top, as well as a pass-through. Sometimes we use a consultant to help us expedite the fees process. So if the applicant would like to go more quickly than the stated cycle time, they can go through a third party to help accelerate that, and those fees pass through the agency. So we've seen more of that in the past year. So we've included that in the budget to ensure we can cover those contract costs. I think we talked about other income. So if we want to jump to the next page, we can talk a bit about what's driving the year-over-year increases. So agency revenue in fiscal year 25 is expected to be up versus the 24 budget by 2.2 million. 900K of that is general fund, which is mainly the state increases and the interest income from the investments. Planning fees are up by 400, and our special fund income is up by 900 year over year. So those three numbers together equal the 2,167,000 planned increase. AIS income is up, driven by LTRA infrastructure and fees. In addition to grants, it's important to remember that AIS has funding from both states at $375,000 each. And that is also inclusive of fees, which is roughly $1 million. So when you look at that full AIS 9.1, roughly $1 million's fees, 750 comes from state funding, and then the rest is grant funding. Yeah,
Mr. Cox?
yes.
Do you have the packet in front of you?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Page 462. The numbers in our packet differ from what you have here on the screen.
462. Sorry, I'm working there.
No problem.
Almost it's at the back.
On the, well, actually, maybe I'm wrong because now I'm looking at the title. It doesn't line up right.
462, yep,
Yep,
okay.
no, I was on the wrong page. So 460 matches up with what you're showing, so pardon me. Just trying to keep up here.
Okay,
We're
thank you,
good.
thank you,
Thank you.
appreciate it. Any other questions? Yes,
On page 459,
Okay.
it shows a $236,000 deficit. Did you cover how that's going to be fulfilled? Sorry, I missed a miss.
yeah, no, we're gonna cover that deficit with the bond fund. So that's
Okay, that's
money
right.
that is effectively in reserve to spend towards that.
Wait, bond funds, isn't that, so you're using debt to cover a deficit?
When we had initially done debt for the building,
Mhm.
there was an amount taken to do long-term maintenance projects. That had been, I guess, something that had been planned for years. And we're working to get that done.
Is that the retaining wall?
Correct. That's the retaining wall. Yep,
Got it.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Mr. Cup.
Great, sure. So continuing on with continuing on with revenue drivers, then we'll jump over to expenses shortly. In terms of the grants, we covered AIS. EIP has monitoring and nearshore grant completions. That's why the the EIP fund is down year over year because some of those grants have completed. Transportation is relatively flat year over year. And then we have consistent BMP budgeted this year versus last year. Moving to the next slide, switching to expenditures. Once again, landscape of the cost assumptions and then year over year drivers. And then we'll also get into some details on the big expenditures. So contracts represent 62% of the total budget. And I have included a contract landscape later in the deck to walk you through the big drivers of that expenditure line. Compensation is 32% of the budget, and that represents, like I said, a fully staffed agency, a 4% average merit increase, and then limited benefits inflation. We are seeing some inflation on our benefits that we give to the agency employees. Financing costs are the same as last year. And then some of our other costs there in that yellow category, which is 4%, include things like IT and infrastructure, communications, utilities, and our property tax. Moving to the next slide. These are some of the expenditure assumptions, and I think we've covered both of these, right? So associated with the deficit, the retaining wall is in at 236K. And then in terms of contracts increasing, there are significant increases in some of the grants. And so we need to contract third parties in order to fulfill and execute those grants. Moving to the next slide, this is the expenditures year over year. Expenditures are up $2 million, 2.1 year over year. So high level, if you look at the increase, general fund is up 800,000, which is driven mainly by compensation. Contracts are actually down slightly year over year. The reason compensation is up is really two things. One is we put in 4% average merit increase. Secondly, at some point last year, we increased from a 13.5% retirement contribution for our employees up to 15%. So that extra couple percent year on year will impact the year-over-year budget. And then finally, we are at a full staff today, and we'll be at a full staff for all of this year is the goal. So you have a slight increase because we were kind of ramping last year. Planning fund is up $500,000 year over year, which is driven by A&O transfers, some reimbursable costs, which is mainly the Heavenly Monitoring Program, and then the additional contracts associated with permitting expediting. Remember, we increased the revenue associated with those expedite fees, so we also have the increase in contracts. And then special fund expenses are lined up with the grant income, so those are the same. Moving to the next page is a summary of the contracts. So trying to dive a little deeper into this, we have $18.2 million of contracts. So to back up and talk about the process for how we came up with this number, right? This is what we call a zero-based budget. So we started at nothing and then worked through what the grants would require, what each of the functions and departments would require in order to complete the work plan. AIS is the primary contracting activity here. As you can see, it's the biggest box in blue on the left. This is driven by prevention and treatment. Those are the big areas where we spend dollars on the AIS program. The next largest area is our EIP contracts. This is mainly to implement LTRA forest health and water quality programs. Those are the two big items there. When we look at our RNA, that's the next largest item. That is a mixture of monitoring contracts as well as process improvement. Housing and REAP is next in terms of size at $1.6 million. Transportation ties to our OWP plan, which was approved back earlier this year. And then the rest of the contracts is for our permitting and compliance functions, our IT support, and our functional support. Just so you know, the staff memo does have an appendix that captures all of the proposed contracts over $100,000 for your detail. Any questions on the contracts?
I don't have any questions. I just, again, going to transparency, let's make sure we email that particular page, to Ms. Nichols and Ms. Waller, who were concerned about that in a response, if that's okay. I don't know if they're still on this call, but I think it's good to provide that directly.
Madam Chair, if I may, Julie Reagan, TRPA Director. Thank you. I think that's a great idea. We will take care of that because it's really clear when you see it in this chart. The majority of contracts are supporting our environmental improvement program, water quality, aquatic invasive species, forest health, research, partnering with academic institutions on science and monitoring. So we'll make sure to get that emailed over to the members of the public.
I believe it's page 467 and 468 in the packet. So if there are no questions on the contracts, we can jump to the last slide or two here, which is just an overview of our resourcing, right? So this gives a view of our headcount or full-time folks on staff by department and the funding source. 80% of the staff is funded by our general fund. 20% is funded by those special funds, which is AIS, CIP, transportation. Any questions on this? This should tie back to the work plan. So as you're looking at the pages for each of the work plan items, this connects to that work plan. The next page is just a quick view of compensation. Compensation is the next biggest item on the budget, which is 9.4, or the proposed budget is $9.4 million. This gives a breakdown for what the employees see in terms of pocket, right? Work time, PTO, and then the benefits that they receive for medical, retirement, and other benefits. I'd say, as we look towards this, we have, and historically, we have made progress towards increasing salary ranges to make them more competitive. Our retirement contribution is 15% in this budget, which is below other government entities. I know we've had that conversation before. But I do believe, coming in new to the agency, the PTO, the medical and the other benefits are competitive. So with that, the final slide here is the request. So as we approve this budget, or request to approve this budget, this is an overall approval for expenditures for the agency, the grant agreements that are incorporated to the budget, our contract expenditures included in the budget. This is approval for staffing levels, which is the 74 folks, the average 4% salary merit increase. The approval of an inflation increase on our planning fees. That, I believe, is subject to a discussion that we'll have this fall, where we'll finalize those. We'll, look at inflation for the year, and we'll make a decision on the action that we'll take, which I think becomes effective early 2025. And then finally, we're also asking for authorization to make any technical corrections as we get further along in the process, if there's anything that we need to tweak slightly. So with that, that would be the request for approval.
Okay, are there any questions of the committee members that are in the room? No, seeing none. Any questions from our community members online?
Nope, I'm okay.
Okay, thank you. I just maybe want to make one comment because you brought it up a couple of times with regards to planning fees. It's a touchy subject, but I feel like it has to at least be said, and that is the perception of those that have to adhere to TRPA's rules and regulations and need to get permits from TRPA. It bothers me a little bit that you can expedite the process by paying more. Because that's always been the perception of the locals, is like, well, some people just cut down trees without permits and pay the fine and go, okay, sorry. So it's a little bit bothersome to me that you can speed up the process by hiring a third-party consultant. I mean, what does that do to everybody else who's in line trying to get a permit from TRPA? Do they get pushed aside and something else gets taken on, or how does that work?
Thank you. I'm happy to address that. Thank you, Member Chair Lane. It's Julie Reagan, TRPA's Executive Director. You raise a valid point and a discussion we have all the time, with the community members. When we went through a series of workshops with the community on permitting years ago, in my other life, in previous positions, I was overseeing the front counter. We did a big public service improvement, continuous improvement project. And this came up a lot. At the time, we had huge backlogs. We've worked all the way through that so that now our review times are actually, no offense, more competitive than local governments. And we are doing really well on our, completeness reviews and our turnaround of permits, meeting our standards and all the metrics that we've set over the years. But what we found, particularly in years when, the building season is short because of winter, some applicants wanted to expedite the process. So we had workshops with the community and decided as a community and with the agency to give that as a choice. But that doesn't come at the cost of regular review times for anyone. So people have the choice, and our metrics are being followed by our team. We have a staff of 21 people that are putting out over 1,000 permits a year, and we're doing really well. But then there are times when, for whatever reason, there's some complexities of the project. There are consultants in the community that are on call, and that's a choice that applicants have. And that's what we've worked out. And also that was validated when we just went through the big permit improvement process that Arlo Stockham was working with our team on. And we had a series of conversations with project applicants, and really that was decided that that is the best way to go. Anything you wanted to add, Chad, to that?
No, I mean, Julie, you captured it. So I to say it another way, if somebody goes outside to do the expediting, it doesn't put anybody that's in line behind, because those are following current cycles. So
Yep.
it, by somebody being able to do that doesn't displace somebody else.
Right.
Just
It,
to make
it
it clear.
really, it sounds to me like it triggers us sending it out to a consultant so that it's paying for that expense.
Correct,
It's not necessarily taking away from staff time.
correct.
That's a great, yeah, clarification. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions from the committee, I'll ask that we open public comment. If any member of the public wishes to address the Ops and Governance Committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Are there any members of the public that are present that would like to address the committee on this item? Okay, seeing none, then we'll go online.
Madam Chair, we have 3 so far. Ann Nichols, you can go ahead and address the committee.
Yeah, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. This is quite thrilling. I'm excited about being able to see some detail on the contracts that are $100,000 or over. That's great, and I can't wait to see that. I guess maybe it wouldn't be okay to just put it out with the financials when you put them out, or is that too much, maybe transparency? I don't know, but that's great. I look forward to seeing it. Thank you for doing this. Because, you know, when the public looks at it, they see 74 staff, and then why do you have to spend 44% of the budget on contracts, which I assume are outside vendors? I don't know. We'll see, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols.
Next, Doug Flaherty, if you'd like to address the committee, please go ahead.
Yeah, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. You know, this whole thing about public transparency or lack of public confidence, you continue to produce slides that have numerous acronyms. I know what they mean, but the public does not know what EIP means, LTRA, TRCD, MTS, RNA, REAP, OWP. Each slide should have some sort of a, code piece of information that defines what those acronyms are. So you might work on that. I don't see how the public could even begin to understand what was just said if they're not familiar with day-to-day operations. The other thing is with these grants and your contract outcomes, I really would like to know what kind of monitoring and analysis is being performed to evaluate how these efforts through your grants will improve, just not maintain the thresholds. We never really, how are you monitoring the effectiveness of these grants? There's a big gap there, I think, in the public's eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty.
Next, we have first name is Lydia. Lydia, you can go ahead and speak if you'd state your full name for the record. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Lydia Stojkovic, Stoykovych. Just a local homeowner, and since the question of the applications and fast tracking came up, I noticed that my question, is there an opportunity during this meeting towards the end of the day under the regional planning to bring up a project that I'm seeing that looks like it happened rather quickly, and its concern is like a public interest of building structure along the lake? Is there a time later during this meeting I can bring that up and just understand how the process for the approvals for that was achieved?
Thank you for that question, and we will answer that for you. Just please stand by. Did you have anything else you
Thanks.
wanted to add?
No, I second the comments of the gentleman though, because I'm not on this day to day. So understanding the acronyms in terms of transparency, I second his comments about not understanding it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Ellie Waller, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you, Ellie Waller. Yes, the world of alphabet soup. Yeah, we all live in it, not just TRPA. It really is important for those first timers or people that don't generally listen. Second, it's an accountability issue. We talk about pass-through grant, pass-through dollars. How is that accounted for? Are there deliverables assigned for those dollars that are sent other places? Also, with special funds, I think the scanning project for the environmental improvement program is probably very important. Did that scanning project also include historical documentation? Sometimes it's hard to find information, and even TRPA staff, and it isn't a detriment to helping the public, but sometimes older documents can't be found. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waller.
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment and invite our executive director to comment on any of those questions that were raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. Just wanted to point out, first and foremost, to Ms. Nichols' question, the contracts over 100,000 are in the packet, as Member Gustafson pointed out on page 467. It's attachment 1 to the budget staff summary, and it's there currently. And if anyone needs additional help with that, happy to provide. Just a couple of other things. I wanted to say a really fantastic job to Chad Cox on his first budget presentation and his first budget preparation, working with our incredibly talented finance team. And so I think he heard loud and clear the acronyms comment.
Yeah, I've experienced the alphabet soup. Yeah.
He's still learning those acronyms himself. And everyone knows you get to put a dollar in my typo jar on my desk if you put an acronym in a headline or in other materials. So we'll do better on the acronyms, we promise. And in terms of the grants, all of those grants are very elaborate with deliverables and reporting. And there are many sources to get that information. I would also just put an email out there. Jeff Cowan, our public information officer, Jeff Cowan, JCOWEN @trpa.gov for the particular project related question that the member of the public had. If that member of the public would just email Jeff, he'd be happy to run down the facts and circumstances related to that.
And I might make one other suggestion, if that's okay. On the contracts and looking at them, if there are questions, should they email Jeff as well, or Chad, or you, Julie, because they may have specific questions on what that, who that individual or company is.
I think the grant and budget questions could go to Chad, and Chad's emails in the staff summary in the introductory page.
Yeah, I find that I get answers from you and from most public employees directly when the public asks those questions. And I think email is always a great way to contact our staff and ask those questions, because it does take a lot of work and time to understand the intricacies of these budgets. So thank you.
Excellent. So to Lydia, the direction is to contact staff directly, and we can answer your questions. The other opportunity for you would be to ask your questions under public comment today. At the end of the governing board meeting, there's an opportunity to bring up issues that are not on the agenda. Okay, so any further questions, comments from the committee members? Okay, seeing none, then I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion to recommend to the board approval of the fiscal year 24-25 budget. Maria, may we please have a roll call vote?
Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Mr. Bass,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson,
Yes.
Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, which is upcoming topics. Mr. Cox?
Yeah, so just real quick, there will not be a financial update in July because we're working through the audit process of the fiscal year 24 financials. We will do a treasurer's report. We still need to decide if that'll just be an informational item that we send you, if we put it on the agenda. So we're working through that as a staff. So just a few things upcoming. The team is kicking off the annual audit here in July, which will be presented here later in the year. We will do the planning fee inflation analysis in October to be approved for startup 25. And then one other thing we're working on is a treasury investment policy. We've got a draft of that. We're working it through. There's an agency outside that can look at those policies and ensure that it works with both states' requirements. So once we have that approved by that group, then we'll bring it to this group for overall approval. I believe the last time the policy's been updated has been maybe 10, 12 years. So it's been a minute. And then finally, as we finalize this budget, we'll be able to jump more into process improvement. My first few months here has really been learning how everything works. And then the last month has been focused on the budget. So I'm excited to jump into some process improvement with our staff. So that's kind of what's upcoming on the finance front. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from committee members? No? Okay. Seeing none, then that was an informational only item. So we'll move on to item number 6, which are committee member comments. Are there any committee member comments at this time? Seeing none?
I will comment
thank
just
you.
real quickly. Again, I would congratulate Chad on jumping in here. And this is a complicated budget and we get a lot of public scrutiny, and I appreciate your jumping in with both feet and making this easy transition.
Thank you.
Ditto. Good comments.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good work. Okay, we'll move to our final matter of business, which is the general public interest comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the Ops and Governance Committee on the item listed below, anything that's not on the agenda, you may do so at this time. Are there any public in the room that would like to address the committee on items not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll go online.
Madam Chair, we have one hand raised so far. Doug Flaherty, if you'd like to address the committee, go ahead.
Thank you, Doug Flaherty, TahoeCleanAir.org. Many believe a public vote of no confidence in the TRPA is now in order in connection with TRPA's pro-growth, pro-developer, and pro-international destination recreation project and code change approvals. This additionally in connection with the failure to prevent and reduce the microscopic or microplastic algae, aquatic invasive species, and human overcapacity crisis, and manipulating threshold language and attainment dates to avoid any real accountability. The Lake Tahoe Basin is out of harmony and out of equilibrium. TRPA's current direction will not improve lake clarity improvement and will only jeopardize public safety in connection with increased human capacity within town center choke points and recreation areas, which could easily lead to loss of life during wildfire evacuation. This lack of confidence in the TRPA has been played out recently with the filing of 2 lawsuits connected with the area plan and code of ordinance changes were approved upon TRPA's findings of no significant environmental effect. This utilizing the TRPA sham desktop environmental checklist, which consistently circumvents comprehensive cumulative environmental analysis. The recent court ruling in favor of the Sierra Club in connection with the Tahoe Keys herbicide use further demonstrated TRPA's ineptness as they bent over backwards to approve this 3-year quote-unquote test. These lawsuits have been joined by a constant barrage of local, state, and international news articles driven by TRPA's mismanagement. Finally, I think considering the high amount of controversy that is existing within the Lake Tahoe Basin community, it's time that the TRPA create a transparent whistleblower policy to allow
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty.
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised to make public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close public comment and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned at 9:32 a.m.